Thank you, everyone, for your patience with the technical difficulties. My name is Savitha, and today I'll be presenting on our work, How Scientists Use Jupyter Notebooks, Goals, Quality Attributes, and Opportunities. So, as you all are most likely familiar, Jupyter is widely used among scientists. And in 2021, the journal Nature named Jupyter as one of the 10 software tools that have transformed how science is done today. And there are a lot of features of Jupyter that make it really convenient to explore and explain scientific data and results. You can include explanatory text as part of your program, including LaTeX to exhibit equations. You can re-execute some of your code cells and also preserve cell outputs so you can see your changes in your data over time. And one way to think about Jupyter Notebook usage in science is as a progression of the wet lab notebooks, but instead an environment for computational science. Scientists are often used to writing in lab notebooks where they keep meticulous notes on experiments and data analyses. And Jupyter Notebooks can be seen as a sort of lab notebook for computational work where they can interleave data and observations as they do their work. However, prior work on usage of Jupyter by general data analysts show that notebooks are often considered exploratory, throwaway, messy, and often is just too much effort to clean up the mess inside them. So this doesn't necessarily square with our image of Jupyter as a lab notebook. And a part of this is because of certain features of Jupyter. So in a Jupyter notebook, all cells share a single global state. And cells can also have side effects. So if I run this code starting with a equals 10, and then I run this cell twice, I've now incremented a by 12. But if you're just looking at this code for the first time and don't know that you can rerun cells, then you might think that something's going strange in this code. You can also run cells out of order. If you ran this code from the top down, you would get an answer of 24. But if you notice, there are cell numbers on this left side of the code, which indicates that the order that the cells are run. So if you ran it in that order, starting with 10, and then adding 1, changing a to 20, and then adding 3, you get a different answer. And so being able to track which order the cells are run is really important in order to replicate the results of a notebook. And all of these features can cause some messiness in a Jupyter notebook. And yet, Jupyter is still highly prized by scientists. So we wanted to understand, how does Jupyter support the needs of scientific users? In particular, we wanted to know what scientists value in the software they write. And in the software engineering literature, this is considered looking into quality attributes. These are attributes of software that are not directly arising from the behavioral requirements of the program, but instead other things that the writers of the software value. So some instances could be how reusable the code is, how maintainable it is, and how scalable it is. And we also wanted to know, what are the tactics that scientists use in order to promote these qualities that they value? So this resulted in 3 research questions. The first being the goals that scientists pursue in their notebooks. We also want to know, what are the quality attributes that they prioritize? And then finally, what are the tactics that they use to meet those quality requirements? And by tactics, we mean either the direct use of existing notebook features or workarounds that they have come up with for the limitations of existing features. So, because we wanted to understand the process of writing code by scientists instead of just the end result, we decided to conduct an observational study where we spent 60 minutes watching our participants, who are scientists in academia, work on their own task, and also conducted 30-minute interviews afterwards. Then, to analyze the data, we used a social science research technique called grounded theory, which is used to analyze open-ended data in a more structured way. So we started out with these low-level codes where we tagged at almost every second of our recordings and our transcripts, and this resulted in like 6,000 codes from our data. And then we used these low-level codes to derive high-level codes related to our notebook goals, quality attributes, and user tactics, which are the results of our research questions. So you can kind of see an example here where we started with our low-level code about comment with inspecting code inside of a function definition, and then we ended up with a high-level code of a tactic relating to out-of-order execution. So we used this qualitative analysis process to derive our notebook goals, quality attributes, and tactics. And in total, we had 20 participants, 9 of them being women, from a variety of scientific fields. We had 11 from computing, 3 from biology, 3 social sciences, and 3 earth scientists. And in total, they worked on 21 notebooks. So our results in total, we have 3 goals and 8 quality attributes. And we also identified 17 tactics that our participants used to promote these quality attributes. We also have some additional findings relating to the use of AI by scientists. But for this talk, I'm just going to focus on these 3 quality attributes: explorability, clarity, and performance. And I'll also highlight 2 tactics that are used to promote each of these quality attributes, and then kind of ending with some design opportunities we identified, as well as some ongoing work our lab has produced. So let's start with explorability. And by explorability, what we really mean is the ability to prototype and iterate on a program's design without a specific end result in mind. And here we identified 2 tactics that were used to promote explorability in code. The first being using cell output correspondences, which is built into the notebook, and also the tactic that people developed, which is cell-based inspection, that I'll go into further. So the first tactic is using cell output correspondences. So the cell-based structure of Jupyter notebooks allow users to compare outputs and incrementally build up their programs. And for participant 12, being able to see these intermediate outputs really helped them explore different ways of tackling a problem. So as an example here, if you are working on a data frame, you can first start out by printing out what that data frame looks like currently, and then decide what additional columns you want to add. And this can kind of help you prototype what you want the final data frame to look like. For the second tactic, almost all of our participants use some amount of inspection code in their notebooks. And this is a term that we give to the temporary code snippets that help the user understand the current state of the notebook. And oftentimes, we saw our participants actually create separate cells to handle this inspection code. So in this example, we see participant 19 actually writing inspection code to understand how this for loop works in this code. And the cell-based structure of Jupyter makes this kind of exploration easier, since these small snippets can interact with other parts of the program, but are still sequestered by their own cell boundary. However, too much inspection code is also a problem. To keep things manageable for himself, participant 19 immediately deleted this inspection cell after looking over the output for like 2 seconds. And that's because interleaving inspection code into a program can really make it difficult to understand what's inspection and what's the actual program, especially if that inspection code has side effects. So one of the design opportunities that we identified is being able to incorporate inspection code into a notebook without cluttering up the rest of the notebook. And one of our ongoing work actually addresses this design opportunity. The next quality attribute I want to highlight is clarity. And this relates to how easy it is to understand a notebook and how presentable it is to others. And again, we found 2 tactics related to using markdown note-taking and avoiding debugging inside functions and loops. So markdown note cells are a key feature of Jupyter notebooks, and people use them in many ways. For participant 20, she actually treated her notebooks explicitly like a wet lab notebook, as we saw before, and she would carefully take notes and annotate her results to refer back to even after she was done completing her work. For participant 17, he actually used Markdown to organize his notebook into specific research questions. So this was a notebook he had spent over a year working on, and he just had a list of different research questions in the form of different Markdown cells. And he would also go back and annotate the outputs that he had saved so he can refer back to them throughout his research process. However, being able to save outputs and annotating them is a less useful strategy when you're working with loops in your code. For example, participant 4 lost the debuggability benefits of Jupyter notebooks when he had to debug inside of a for loop. So usually, if you're working with straight line code, Jupyter's cell-based structure can allow you to just inspect inside what that code is doing by simply running a cell. But if your cell has a for loop, then you have to revert back to using prints and break statements like you would in regular scripting. And so you have somewhat of a tension between being able to group related code through loops or functions and being able to break apart a cell to inspect inside of it. So, one design opportunity we identified is liveness affordances that work inside loops and functions. And by liveness affordances, I kind of mean something that looks like this. So, this is an example of projection boxes, which allows you to trace through code automatically through live programming. And it automatically produces these boxes, which help you trace through and understand what's happening to a variable at each step. And we can try including these kinds of UIs into Jupyter notebooks to kind of help people better debug their code without making it difficult to understand what's going on in your notebook. The final quality attribute I want to highlight is performance. And in this context, we don't necessarily mean just how quickly the code runs. Instead, our participants really cared about being able to limit unnecessary recomputations. And for this, we again highlight two tactics relating to cell-by-cell execution and state reuse. So for participant 4, the main reason that they enjoyed using Jupyter Notebooks is being able to just load the data and not have to reload it every single time they wanted to start working on their project. And this is especially important for scientists working with large data sets that are often gigabytes or even terabytes in size. And if you're like our second participant, sometimes running a cell can take you over 6.5 minutes. And because of these long run times, it can be really important to try to avoid recomputing the same code over and over again as you're trying to explore or debug parts of your code. However, one workaround we saw our participants use is state reuse. So you would actually not rerun a cell every time you had to do a new exploration. Instead, you would keep the outputs of a cell and try to make sure you don't mess up the output when you work on other things. However, when you combine this with the manual state management that using a Jupyter notebook requires, you can often get unexpected output. So for participant 2, she wanted to avoid rerunning that 6-minute cell, and along with other cells in her program that had long run times. So she had tried to she ran the cell once and worked with the URLs that she got from it. However, midway through her work session, she actually edited the file that you see here and didn't rerun that cell, except she couldn't tell that she had noticed this file had changed because she never really reran it and this file was somewhere else in her repository. And so now this cell is out of date, but it's not very clear to the user that it's like that. So she only noticed that something was wrong when she started getting strange results. And only after some time spent debugging, she realized that she had never actually reran the cell from the file. So one design opportunity we identified is being able to track outdated code, including code that becomes outdated due to changes in the general environment. Okay, so far we've covered 3 different quality attributes, and we covered 2 tactics for each of those, and also identified some design opportunities. And earlier in the talk, I highlighted that we have some new designs for notebooks in our lab that we're considering, and we would love to continue to talk to you all about this. And I've included contact information for those from our lab so you can reach out to them. So the first design is Peapod. So in Peapod, we're developing mechanisms of gradual notebook structure in order to promote organization, clarity, and reusability through modular design without inhibiting free-form expression. So the idea is to create reusable components by setting boundaries for scopes and side effects using these pods. And you can kind of see an example of using these pods. If you change the value of ls in your first Peapod, and then you run it and export that value, your code is immediately out of date. And it's kind of hard to see on this slide, but the 2 cells, the 2 Peapods at the bottom are actually turned gray for the user to notice that they are out of date. Oh, you can see a little better now. And then if you wanted to go back and re-update your code, if you import again from that first Peapod, you'll see your cell turn green again because now you have the most up-to-date version of your list from before. You can also control side effects with this using Peapods. So in this example, we changed our value of ls in our second Peapod, But in our third peapod at the bottom, we see that we actually have to import twice and give them different names. So you don't accidentally end up reusing that list with meaning one peapod's value versus another. Another notebook design we've been working on is TidyNote. So this relates to being able to have clarity and explorability in your notebook. So in TidyNote, you can actually have cell-level scratch pads that let you incorporate inspection code and retain it without it cluttering up the rest of your notebook. And you can also pin specific cells in order to keep referring back to them in a way that's easier and to navigate inside of a notebook. And then finally, we have this work called plottery. So one additional result we had is about scientists' use of AI tools when programming. And we found that some of our participants really struggled with using unfamiliar libraries that tools like ChatGPT introduced into their actual code. And one of these libraries was matplotlib, and we had an instance of a scientist trying to create a violin plot with ChatGPT and was just spending so much time trying to adjust it to meet her needs. And what plottery allows users to do is to create and edit plots with both AI, a GUI, and directly editing the program's code, which allows users to explore new figures. So here's a little demonstration of plottery, where producing a new plot introduces this GUI inside of the Jupyter notebook, and it produces all of these options that you can adjust directly and relate back to the code that you have previously through a bidirectional connection. And so you can directly adjust the values of those properties. You can see that it relates back to counts that you have in the cell prior, and it automatically produces those options based off of what it guesses you need. You can also do some direct manipulation of the plot itself. So we'll see here that you can actually adjust the bars directly on the GUI, and you can also see that it changes with the code above. And then finally, you can use some AI tools to help you produce code, and you can keep interacting with it through just AI, but you're also able to directly manipulate the text and have future manipulations relate back to the text you added. So in conclusion, we have an observational study of 20 scientific users of Jupyter Notebooks, which showed that the goals they have for notebooks are not just messy explorations, and that they value many quality attributes that are often in conflict. They also use different tactics to meet one of the quality attributes, but sometimes these tactics can inhibit other things that they care about. And then finally, we went through some new designs for notebooks that help scientists meet their quality attributes. And I've also included the archive version of our paper, so it is non-paywalled. But I just want to highlight that we are looking for collaborators, so if you're interested in any of these designs or any of the results that we had in the study, please feel free to reach out to me or Isla. She's in the audience over there. So thank you.